the greatest military disaster in Macedonian history, the catastrophic failure of a system that had conquered the known world, the fatal mistake that cost an empire its future. For centuries, we have been told a simple story about the Battle of Cynoscephalae, that the Roman legion was simply better than the Macedonian phalanx. But this is a lie, a dangerous oversimplification that hides the real, far more dramatic truth. Today, we will journey back to a foggy morning in 197 BC to uncover what really happened when the two most formidable fighting machines of the ancient world collided in the hills of Greece. The story you think you know is wrong. Prepare to have everything challenged as we reveal the real reason the legion broke the phalanx. To understand the earthquake that was Cynoscephalae, we must first understand the world it shook. By the late 3rd century BC, the Mediterranean was a chessboard dominated by two powers, Rome in the west, the Hellenistic kingdoms in the east, the successors to Alexander the Great. Rome was a republic, ambitious and relentless. It had fought long and bloody wars against Carthage for control of the western Mediterranean. But as Rome looked east, it saw another power rising, Macedon. Now Macedon wasn't just any kingdom. It was the land of Philip II and his son Alexander the Great. The Macedonian phalanx, perfected by Philip, had been the spearhead of Alexander's conquests, toppling the entire Persian Empire. Now, another king named Philip sat on the throne. Philip V. He was young, intelligent, and he dreamed of restoring Macedon's former glory. The first clash between these two giants wasn't a direct battle, but a game of shadows. During the Second Punic War, when the brilliant Carthaginian general Hannibal was rampaging through Italy, he made an alliance with Philip V. Rome, fighting for its very life, saw this as a potential disaster, a war on two fronts. So Rome did what it did best. It used diplomacy and a small show of force to keep Philip busy in Greece. This became known as the First Macedonian War. It wasn't a huge, loud conflict, more like a series of skirmishes and proxy fights. But it planted the seeds of hatred and deep mistrust between the two rising powers. After Rome finally defeated Carthage, it had time to settle old scores. Philip V had used the peace to expand his influence in the Aegean Sea and into mainland Greece. The Greek city-states, like a collection of quarreling neighbors, grew fearful of their powerful Macedonian neighbor. Some of them secretly sent messages to Rome, asking for help. Rome saw its opportunity. In 200 BC, the Roman Senate delivered an ultimatum to Philip. Stay out of the affairs of the Greek cities. Philip, a proud king, refused. The Second Macedonian War had begun. Rome was sending an army across the Adriatic Sea, not as a liberator at first, but as a punisher. The stage was set for a showdown that would decide the future of the ancient world. To understand the earthquake that was Cynoscephalae, we must first understand the world it shook. By the late 3rd century BC, the Mediterranean was a chessboard dominated by two powers, Rome in the west, and the Hellenistic kingdoms in the east, successors to Alexander the Great. Rome was a republic, ambitious and relentless. It had fought long and bloody wars against Carthage for control of the western Mediterranean. But as Rome looked east, it saw another power rising, Macedon. Macedon wasn't just any kingdom. This was the land of Philip II and his son Alexander the Great. The Macedonian phalanx, perfected by Philip, had been the spearhead of Alexander's conquests, toppling the Persian Empire. Now another king named Philip sat on the throne, Philip V. He was young, intelligent, and he dreamed of restoring Macedon's glory. The first clash between these two giants was not a direct battle, but a game of shadows. During the Second Punic War, when the brilliant Carthaginian general Hannibal was rampaging through Italy, he made an alliance with Philip V. Rome, fighting for its life. Saw this as a potential disaster, a war on two fronts. So Rome did what it did best. It used diplomacy and a small show of force to keep Philip busy in Greece. This was the First Macedonian War. It wasn't a big war, more a series of skirmishes and proxy fights, but it planted the seeds of hatred and mistrust between the two powers. After Rome finally defeated Carthage, it had time to settle old scores. Philip V had used the peace to expand his influence in the Aegean Sea and into mainland Greece. The Greek city-states, like a collection of quarreling neighbors, grew fearful of their powerful Macedonian neighbor. Some of them secretly sent messages to Rome asking for help. Rome saw its opportunity. 200 BC, the Roman Senate gave an ultimatum to Philip: stay out of the affairs of the Greek cities. Philip, a proud king, refused. The Second Macedonian War had begun. Rome was sending an army across the Adriatic Sea, not as a liberator at first, but as a punisher. The stage was set for a showdown that would decide the future of the ancient world. The coming conflict was more than just a fight between Rome and Macedon. It was a test of two completely different systems of war. One was a machine of perfect order, the other, a system of flexible chaos. Let's meet them. First, the Macedonian phalanx. Imagine a block of soldiers, 16 men deep and 16 men across. Now, imagine every single one of them holding a giant spear called a sarissa. This spear was incredibly long, up to 6 meters, or about 20 feet. The first 5 rows of soldiers would point their sarissas forward, creating a deadly forest of spear points. An enemy soldier couldn't even get close to the actual men holding the spears. The soldiers behind them held their sarissas up in the air, ready to step forward and replace the men in front if they fell. The phalanx was like a human tank, or a giant deadly hedgehog. When it moved forward on flat, open ground, it was almost unstoppable. The men of the phalanx carried small shields and wore light armor. Their main protection was the spear itself. Their strength was their incredible frontal power. Their weakness, they were not flexible. The phalanx was designed to move forward, straight ahead. It could not turn quickly. It could not fight well in forests or on rough, hilly ground, where its perfect lines would be broken. Now, let's look at the Roman legion. The Romans fought in a completely different way. Their basic unit was not a giant block, but a smaller group called a Maniple. A legion was made up of about 30 of these Maniples, arranged in a checkerboard pattern. This checkerboard formation meant there were gaps in the Roman line. These gaps weren't weaknesses. They were design features. They allowed the more experienced soldiers in the back lines to move forward to help the front lines. They allowed the Romans to change direction quickly. They allowed the army to adapt to the shape of the land. What about the Roman soldier? He was a multi-tool. He carried 2 throwing spears called pila. Before fighting hand-to-hand, the Romans would throw their pila. These spears were designed to bend when they hit a shield, making the shield heavy and impossible to use. After throwing their pila, the Roman soldiers would draw their short swords, the Gladius. The Gladius was not a long, elegant sword. It was a short, brutal weapon, perfect for stabbing in close combat. The Roman soldier also had a large, curved shield, the Scutum, which gave him excellent personal protection. So the difference was clear. The phalanx was a specialist. It did one thing: frontal assault on flat ground better than anyone. The legion was a generalist. It was flexible, adaptable, and could fight in almost any terrain. The coming battle would be the ultimate test. Which system was superior? The unstoppable force or the immovable object? Armies are made of soldiers, but they are led by men. The Second Macedonian War was shaped by its 2 commanders, Titus Quinctius Flamininus of Rome and King Philip V of Macedon. Flamininus was a young Roman aristocrat, but he was not just a nobleman. He was a talented general and, perhaps more importantly, a brilliant politician. He was in his early 30s when he was given command of the Roman army in Greece. He was ambitious, but he understood that Rome's power was not just about winning battles, but about winning hearts and minds. He was a student of Greek culture and could speak the language. He saw the war as a chance to present Rome not as a conqueror, but as a friend of Greek freedom. King Philip V was his opposite in many ways. He was a proud Macedonian king, a direct successor to the great tradition of Alexander. He was a skilled soldier and had reformed the Macedonian army, making it strong again. He was intelligent and bold, but perhaps also overconfident. He believed in the power of his phalanx and in the destiny of Macedon to rule Greece. He saw the Romans as barbarians from the west, who had no business interfering in Greek affairs. The war between them was not just a clash of armies, but a clash of personalities and visions. Flamininus wanted to build a Roman-friendly world in the east. Philip wanted to keep that world under Macedonian control. Both men were smart, capable, and determined to win. Their personal rivalry would play a decisive role on the battlefield of Cynoscephalae. For 2 years, From 200 to 198 BC, the two armies maneuvered in Greece. There were small battles, but no decisive engagement. Flamininus tried to force Philip to fight, but Philip was clever. He avoided battle on ground that didn't suit his phalanx. He tried to use diplomacy, trying to convince the Greek cities that the Romans were the real enemy. But Flamininus was a better diplomat. He slowly won over the Greek states. By the summer of 197 BC, Philip found himself increasingly isolated. He knew he had to fight a battle soon, or risk losing everything. The two armies were in Thessaly, a region of northern Greece. It was time for the final showdown. The name of the battlefield itself tells a story. Cynoscephalae means dog's heads in Greek. It was a region of low, rocky hills, with ridges running in different directions. It was, in short, terrible terrain for a phalanx. In June 197 BC, both armies were marching through this region, separated by the hills. A thick fog lay over the landscape in the early morning. Neither commander knew exactly where the other army was. Philip was camped in the plains. He believed the Romans were still some distance away. He made a critical error. He didn't think the Romans would be foolish enough to attack him in such strong defensive terrain, so he sent out a large part of his army to forage for food and supplies. Meanwhile, Flamininus, with his entire army, was moving cautiously through the hills. He sent his own advance force ahead to scout the ridges. What happened next was not part of any grand plan. It was an accident. On one of the Dog's Head hills, the Roman scouts ran into the Macedonian foragers. A small, confused skirmish broke out in the fog. Neither side had intended to fight that morning, but now the battle had begun. Messengers rushed back to both commanders. The enemy is here. Philip, realizing his mistake, quickly ordered his main army to form up and advance. He still had his core phalanx troops, but he was caught by surprise. Flamininus, seeing an opportunity, ordered his entire army to advance and support their men who were already fighting. The battle that neither side had planned was about to become the most important conflict of the war. The fog began to lift, revealing the two armies rushing to form their lines on the broken, hilly terrain. The terrain that Philip had thought was his protection was about to become his prison. King Philip V, seeing the terrain before him, made his deployment. He positioned his elite phalanx, the pride of his army, on his left wing, where the ground rose to give them a distinct advantage. This was his hammer. He believed that from this dominant high ground, its unstoppable wall of spears could simply roll down the hill and shatter the Roman right wing opposite them. For his own right wing, which was still scrambling to form up on the broken ground, he placed his lighter, more flexible troops and his cavalry. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. Use the overwhelming power of his left to secure a swift victory, while his right wing simply held the line. The Roman commander Titus Quinctius Flamininus saw Philip's gambit. He met strength with strength, placing his most experienced Roman legions directly opposite the Macedonian phalanx. But he also saw the weakness in Philip's deployment. On his own left wing, facing the still-forming Macedonian right, he positioned his terrifying war elephants and some of his finest auxiliary troops. His strategy was the mirror image of Philip-esque: hold the phalanx on his right with sheer Roman grit, while using his more mobile left to punch through the weaker, disorganized Macedonian right. The battle began with a terrifying roar. And just as Philip had predicted, his phalanx on the left was an avalanche of steel and death. The massive 16-rank deep formation advanced downhill, a seemingly impenetrable wall of 21-foot-long sarissas bristling before them. The Roman soldiers of the right wing fought with desperate courage, but they were struggling to hold their ground. The long Macedonian spears kept them at a brutal distance, their shorter Gladius swords useless against an enemy they couldn't even reach. Their shields were pierced, their lines buckled. Step by agonizing step, the Roman right was being relentlessly pushed back. It looked as if Philip's strategy was working to perfection. Victory for Macedon seemed not just possible, but inevitable. But it was here, in the chaos and the blood, the nature of the terrain and the fundamental differences between the two armies began to tell the real story. The Macedonian right wing, a force that was meant to support the victorious advance of the phalanx, was in complete disarray. They were still struggling to form up into their rigid battle lines on the rough, uneven ground. The hills and valleys that defined the battlefield broke their formations. turning what should have been a solid block of spears into a disorganized, vulnerable crowd of individual soldiers. They were an army in pieces before the first blow had even landed. Flamininus saw it all. He watched his own right wing being mauled, pushed back by the phalanx, but he refused to panic. In a moment of tactical brilliance, he made a decision that was as risky as it was inspired. He detached a small holding force to do the impossible, delay the inexorable advance of the phalanx, and personally rode to take command of his own left wing, where the real opportunity lay. He gave the order. His war elephants, trumpeting in fury, charged the disorganized Macedonian right. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The sight, the sound, and the sheer alien smell of these behemoths sent waves of terror through the Macedonian lines. Their horses, panicked beyond control, bucked and fled, trampling their own infantry. The soldiers, their formation already broken by the terrain, now broke in spirit. The entire Macedonian right wing began to collapse and disintegrate. A rout before the battle had truly been joined. But the single most decisive, most famous moment of the battle was yet to come. The Roman left wing, now led by a triumphant Flamininus, had swept the field clean. They had shattered the Macedonian right. The question was, what now? To their right, their comrades were still in mortal danger, on the verge of breaking before the unstoppable Macedonian phalanx. This is the moment the inherent genius of the Roman legion system was laid bare for all the world to see. A Roman military tribune and officer whose name is tragically lost to history made a decision entirely on his own initiative. He saw the phalanx grinding his fellow Romans into the dirt, but he also saw something else. Because of the uneven ground it was advancing over, the phalanx was no longer a perfect, straight line. Its relentless forward momentum had caused it to bend and stretch, opening fatal gaps in its formation, particularly at its exposed rear. This anonymous tribune did not wait for orders from Flamininus. He didn't hesitate. He took the 20 Maniples under his direct command, roughly 2,000 soldiers, and peeled them away. From the main Roman line, instead of throwing his men into the meat grinder at the front of the phalanx, he did the unthinkable. Led his men on a hard march around the flank, to the rear of the triumphant Macedonian left wing. He ordered his Maniples to attack the phalanx from behind. This was the phalanx's single greatest weakness, its ultimate nightmare. The formation was an offensive juggernaut, designed exclusively to face forward. Its soldiers carried only small shields for personal defense, and their monstrously long sarissas were worse than useless in close-quarters combat, especially from the side or the rear. They were utterly hopelessly exposed. The Roman legionaries, with their large, curved scutum shields and their deadly short swords, were perfectly designed for this exact kind of brutal, intimate fighting. They surged into the gaps and crashed into the unprotected backs of the Macedonian soldiers. They got in close, under the unwieldy forest of spears, and began their grim work. They stabbed and hacked at the poorly armored backs and sides of the phalangites. The mighty phalanx, which only moments before had been on the cusp of a glorious victory, was now trapped. It could not turn, it could not reform, it could not fight back. The once unbreakable formation dissolved into chaos, confusion, and slaughter. Being their elite wing, the very heart of their army, being systematically destroyed from behind, the rest of the Macedonian army lost its nerve. The soldiers who had been so confidently pushing back the Roman right suddenly halted. They looked back over their shoulders and saw their comrades being cut to pieces. A wave of panic ripped through the ranks. They broke and they fled. The battle was over. The flexibility of the Roman legion, the bold initiative of a single, nameless officer, and a terrain utterly unsuited for the rigid phalanx had combined to forge one of the most stunning and decisive victories in the history of Rome. Philip V escaped with his life, but his army was annihilated. The Macedonian phalanx, the legendary instrument of Alexander the Great's conquest of the known world, had been irrevocably broken by the Roman legion. The greatest military disaster in Macedonian history. The catastrophic failure of a system that had conquered the known world. The fatal mistake that cost an empire its future. For centuries, we've been told a simple story about the Battle of Cynoscephalae, that the Roman legion was simply better than the Macedonian phalanx. But this is a lie. It's a dangerous oversimplification that hides the real, far more dramatic truth. Today, we will journey back to a foggy morning in 197 BC to uncover what really happened when the two most formidable fighting machines of the ancient world collided in the hills of Greece. The story you think you know? Prepare to have it challenged. We will reveal the real reason the legion broke the phalanx. The story of Cynoscephalae is often told as a simple tale of technological and tactical superiority. A clear-cut case of an outdated system being swept away by a more advanced one. The story goes, the Roman legion was a better system than the Macedonian phalanx, and this single battle proved it decisively. This is the first and biggest myth, a tidy narrative that fits neatly into a textbook but completely misses the chaotic, contingent reality of ancient warfare. It's an explanation that feels correct because it's simple, but simplicity is often the enemy of truth. The idea that one system was inherently superior is a conclusion reached with the benefit of hindsight, ignoring the specific circumstances that decided the fate of thousands on that one fateful day. The truth, as it so often is far more complex and infinitely more interesting. Cynoscephalae did not prove that the legion was always better. It proved that the legion was more adaptable. If this battle had been fought on the flat, open plains of Macedon, the traditional killing fields where the phalanx was designed to dominate, the outcome might have been very different. On a level field, the Macedonian phalanx was an almost unstoppable force of nature, a bristling wall of steel and wood that could grind any opponent into the dust. Its frontal power was unmatched. The phalanx was still a devastating weapon in the right conditions, a fact the Romans themselves were keenly aware of. The Romans won at Cynoscephalae not because their system was universally superior, but because on that particular day, their system was perfectly suited to the chaos that unfolded. The victory was a product of a specific confluence of factors: the rough, hilly terrain that broke the phalanx's cohesion, the surprise nature of the encounter that prevented a planned deployment, and the tactical genius of the Roman commander, Titus Quinctius Flamininus, and his subordinate officers. These were not proofs of inherent superiority, but of situational advantage. This leads us to the second pervasive myth, the idea that this battle was the definitive end of the phalanx. Many people believe that after the defeat at Cynoscephalae, the phalanx was consigned to the dustbin of military history, a relic that everyone immediately recognized as obsolete. This is completely and demonstrably false. The shock of the defeat was immense, but it did not cause every Hellenistic kingdom to suddenly abandon a military system that had dominated the Mediterranean for nearly 2 centuries. The phalanx continued to be a core component of armies across the Hellenistic world for decades. In fact, just 29 years later at the Battle of Pydna in 168 BC, the Romans would face another, even larger Macedonian phalanx, and they would struggle against it, winning again not through simple superiority, but through a combination of tactical maneuvering and exploiting a momentary gap in the Macedonian lines. Even after Pydna, Hellenistic kingdoms from Syria to Egypt continued to field armies based on the phalanx principle for over a century, adapting and modifying it but never completely abandoning it until they were finally absorbed by Rome. Cynoscephalae was not the death of the phalanx, rather it was the beginning of the end of Macedonian military dominance. The moment the world realized that the heirs of Alexander were, in fact, beatable. The third myth is that the Battle of Cynoscephalae was a simple, straightforward victory for Rome, a clean and decisive display of martial prowess. The reality is that the Romans came perilously close to losing. The battle was a messy, desperate affair, fought in 2 distinct halves. On one side of the battlefield, the Roman left wing, facing the hastily assembled but powerful Macedonian right under King Philip V himself, was being systematically destroyed. The Macedonian phalanx, even on broken ground, was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was pushing forward relentlessly, its wall of pikes overwhelming the Roman legionaries. The Roman left was buckling, on the verge of a full-scale rout that would have spelled disaster for the entire army. The battle was hanging by a thread. It was only won because of the bold, independent action of one unnamed Roman military tribune. Seeing the disaster unfolding on the Roman left and the success of his own section of the army on the right, this officer made a decision that would change history. Without waiting for orders from Flamininus, he detached his cohort of Maniples, wheeled them around, and charged into the exposed. vulnerable rear of the victorious Macedonian right wing. This single, authorized action shattered the phalanx's great strength. Its unbreakable forward momentum and turned it into its greatest weakness. Attacked from the rear, unable to turn their long pikes to face the new threat, the Macedonians were slaughtered. This moment highlights a key fundamental difference between the two armies. Roman soldiers, from the lowest centurion to the highest-ranking tribune, were trained and empowered to think for themselves, to seize the initiative, and to adapt to the fluid reality of the battlefield. The Macedonian phalanx, by contrast, was a system of absolute top-down obedience. It was a perfect instrument when the plan was followed flawlessly, but it was brittle and disastrously inflexible when things went wrong. So, what is the hidden truth of Cynoscephalae? A. It is not a story about one weapon being better than another, or a legionary sword being superior to a sarissa. It is a story about systems. It is a story of philosophy, training, and command structure. The Roman system was built on a foundation of flexibility, individual initiative, and tactical adaptability. It was composed of smaller, more maneuverable units that could react independently to a changing battlefield. The Macedonian system, a legacy of Philip II and Alexander the Great, was built on perfect order, iron discipline, and overwhelming frontal power. It was a magnificent single-purpose instrument designed for decisive head-on collisions. On that fateful, foggy day in the hills of Thessaly, the more flexible, more adaptable system won. It was not a victory of sword over pike, but a victory of adaptability over rigidity. The Roman legion could fight well on flat ground, and it could fight well on a hill. The phalanx could only fight to its full potential in one of those scenarios. When the battle refused to conform to its ideal conditions, it broke. This lesson resonates far beyond the ancient world. In any field of human competition, whether it is the military, business, technology, or even art, the system that can adapt to changing circumstances and unexpected challenges often has a decisive advantage over a system that is designed for perfection in only one specific situation. The world is rarely a flat, predictable plain. It is more often a series of unexpected hills and valleys. Cynoscephalae is not just a dusty story from ancient history. It is a timeless and vital lesson in strategy. It is a reminder that the ability to react, to improvise, and to empower individuals to make crucial decisions in the heat of the moment can be more powerful than any perfectly designed but rigid plan. The real reason the legion broke the phalanx was that the legion was designed to bend, while the phalanx was designed to stand firm. And on that day, the ground itself demanded that they bend or be broken. The dust of Cynoscephalae had barely settled, but the world was already changing. The immediate aftermath was pure chaos. King Philip V and the shattered remnants of his once proud army scrambled back to Macedon, a humiliating retreat. The Roman victory was absolute, a crushing blow to Macedonian power, but what happened next, in the weeks and months that followed, was just as pivotal as the battle itself. Instead of a brute force march on Macedon, the Roman commander, Titus Quinctius Flamininus, played a much savvier game. He took his legions on a tour of Greece. It was a demonstration of force, yes, but it was also a mission of diplomacy. He showed the Greek cities the might of Rome, but he offered them something Philip never could, something they craved above all else: freedom. The climax of this political theater came in 196 BC, at the Isthmian Games. Imagine the scene, a massive festival, a gathering of Greeks from every corner of the Hellenistic world, all eyes on one man. Flamininus stood before them and made an announcement that would echo through history. He proclaimed the freedom of the Greeks. All Greek cities, he declared, in both Europe and Asia, were to be free. Free from Macedonian garrisons, free to live under their own laws, their own traditions. The crowd, initially stunned into silence, erupted into a roar of disbelief and then ecstatic celebration. This was a political masterstroke. The Greeks, who had once viewed the Romans as just another foreign invader, now hailed them as liberators. It was a paradigm shift. One by one, cities that had been under Macedonian control for generations threw out their garrisons and declared their allegiance to Rome. Flamininus hadn't just won a war, it skillfully transformed a military victory into a political empire built on goodwill and friendship. You could watch the map of Greece change color region by region. Thessaly, the very ground where the battle was fought, became a staunch Roman ally. The Aetolian League, who had fought alongside Rome, saw its influence swell. In the south, the Achaean League also aligned itself with the new power. Macedon found itself utterly isolated, stripped of its fleet, and burdened with a heavy war indemnity. Its days as the dominant force in Greece were over. The shockwaves of Cynoscephalae radiated far beyond the shores of Greece. To the east, the other great Hellenistic powers, the Seleucid Empire in Syria and the Ptolemaic Kingdom in Egypt, watched with a mixture of awe and apprehension. This new power from the west wasn't just strong, it was clever. Rome was a force to be reckoned with, a player that demanded respect on the world stage. The battle also fundamentally changed Rome itself. This was its first major military foray into the complex, glittering world of the Greek East. It gave Roman generals a taste for Eastern conquest, for the immense wealth and glory that could be won there. This allure of the East would become a driving force in Roman politics for the next century, fueling ambition and shaping the Republic's destiny. Cynoscephalae was more than just a single battle. It was the moment the torch was passed. It marked the end of the age of Macedonian supremacy and the dawn of a new one, the Roman era. It was the first decisive step on Rome's long march to becoming the master of the Mediterranean. The Battle of Cynoscephalae wasn't just a clash of armies in a remote corner of Greece. It was a monumental turning point in world history. It was the day the Roman legion proved its superiority, not by brute force in a head-on collision, but by being smarter, more flexible, and ultimately more adaptable than its formidable rival, the Macedonian phalanx. We've journeyed through the chaos of that day, seeing how the challenging terrain, the shock of a surprise encounter, and the brilliant, independent initiative of a single Roman officer forged a victory that seemed at first completely impossible. We've peeled back the layers of myth to uncover the true story. It's not a simple tale of one system being inherently better than another, but a powerful demonstration of a flexible, modular system triumphing over a rigid, monolithic one.
Oh, nice.
The legacy of Cynoscephalae is profound. It helped pave the way for a world shaped by Rome, the art, the law, the languages, and the very ideas of Rome would come to dominate the Western world for centuries. All of that was built upon the foundation of decisive victories like this one. The echoes of the Colosseum, the enduring Roman roads, the principles and legal codes, and even the architecture of our modern cities, they all carry a piece of that legacy, made possible on battlefields like this. But history isn't just about reciting what happened. It's a dynamic conversation, and it's about asking the big questions. That's where you come in. We genuinely want to hear what you think. What, in your opinion, is the most important lesson we can take away from the Battle of Cynoscephalae? Do you agree with the assessment that the Legion's greatest strength was its adaptability rather than its raw power? And here's a good one. If you were King Philip V on that fateful day, surveying the battlefield as things started to go wrong, what would you have done differently? Let us know your thoughts, theories, and any questions you have in the comments section below. We're really looking forward to diving in there and answering as many as we can in a special follow-up Q&A discussion. Let's get a real conversation going about this fascinating and pivotal moment in ancient history. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most decisive battles, please do us a huge favor and give this video a thumbs up. It truly helps our channel reach more people who are passionate about the past. If you know a friend who loves history, share it with them. Of course, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell so you won't miss our next documentary adventure. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey back in time. Always keep exploring, always keep questioning, and we'll see you down in the comments. Till next time.